Alright, let's talk about one of the most enigmatic, unsettling, and strangely beautiful figures in all of Warhammer 40k. Fulgrim, the Daemon Primarch of the Emperor's Children. His tale isn't just one of fall and corruption, it's a story of possession, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, redemption, or at least the faintest hope of it. Fulgrim isn't like the other traitor Primarchs. While Horus fell with fire and fury, while Mortarion embraced decay, and Angron tore apart his own humanity in rage, Fulgrim's fall was quiet, seductive, and terrifyingly intimate. He wasn't just corrupted by chaos, he was invaded, body and soul. And for a long time, fans have asked the same question. Was it really Fulgrim who gave in to Slaanesh, or was he pushed from within? Did he truly choose this path, or is he now just a prisoner in his own flesh? It's not just idle speculation or fan fiction fuel. There are clues, strange moments in the lore where the Daemon Primarch doesn't quite seem complete, where something behind those shimmering eyes feels off, fractured, where the perfect porcelain smile hides something broken underneath. This isn't a story about power or ambition. It's a horror story wrapped in silk and gold. And if you want to understand Fulgrim, you need to look past the surface, past the sculpted beauty and into the rotting soul beneath. Because deep inside that gilded shell, some say, Fulgrim is still screaming. And the question that haunts fans to this day is simple. Is the painted soul of Fulgrim still trapped inside himself? There's something about cursed paintings in Warhammer that just sticks with you. Maybe it's the idea that something as still and silent as a canvas could become a prison, or worse, a mirror. And when we talk about Fulgrim, there's no getting around the infamous portrait. It wasn't just a painting. For many fans, it's the moment where his fall stopped being metaphorical and became something far more literal, something parasitic. Some even go so far as to say that everything that followed, the daemonhood, the treachery, the unspeakable acts, was birthed in that single, elegant frame. The story goes like this. During a campaign in a distant system, Fulgrim found himself in the company of an artist. Not a warrior, not a general, just a simple painter with an extraordinary gift. This artist saw something divine in Fulgrim. How could he not? The Primarch's presence was like living mythology. And so, with brush and pigment, he sought to capture what words could not, the soul of perfection. Fulgrim, being who he was, agreed. Maybe out of vanity, maybe out of curiosity, or maybe because, deep down, he wanted to see himself the way others saw him. But this wasn't just any painting. It wasn't even just warp-tainted, although that's the most popular explanation. Some fans believe it was a creation born of Slaaneshi influence, a trap disguised as flattery. Others think it was an accident, that the sheer act of trying to capture a Primarch's essence on canvas was enough to open a doorway to something dark. Whatever the origin, the result was the same. The painting didn't just show Fulgrim, it absorbed him, or rather, a part of him, a fragment of his soul. Some whisper was drawn into that artwork. And that's when things get weird. Because not long after the painting was completed, those close to Fulgrim began to notice changes. Subtle at first. His temper sharpened. His eyes lingered a bit too long on acts of violence. He started to speak in riddles, to contradict himself in ways that didn't make sense for someone so precise. And all the while, the painting remained, quiet, observing, almost breathing. Some fan interpretations suggest that the painting became a psychic conduit, a way for the warp to whisper directly to Fulgrim's core. But my favorite theory is more poetic. It says that the painting split him, that the man we once knew, the perfectionist, the idealist, was locked inside that canvas, watching helplessly as his body walked away. And the thing left behind? That was a hollow shell, filled up by something else entirely. A daemon, maybe. Or just the echo of his own ego, unleashed and unbound. There are even suggestions in some apocryphal texts that Fulgrim, post-corruption, visited the painting in secret, that he stared at it for hours, that he talked to it. And what's more disturbing, some say it talked back. Imagine that for a second. A godlike being, bent and twisted into a creature of pleasure and pain, haunted by a static image of who he used to be. Not a memory, not a dream, a reflection. Trapped behind glass, behind color, behind oil and canvas. It makes you wonder, was Fulgrim truly possessed, or was the daemon simply filling a void he himself carved out? Because if part of his soul remained inside that painting, then what does that say about the creature that took his place? Was the real Fulgrim screaming, fighting, begging to be let out? Or did he watch in silence, numbed by his own choices, until even the memory of who he was began to fade? What really seals the deal for a lot of fans is how that painting eventually had to be destroyed. Not because it was cursed in the usual malevolent sense, but because it hurt. It was a tether, a source of conflict. The Daemon Fulgrim couldn't stand the sight of it, not because it threatened him, but because it reminded him. Some believe it took a ritual sacrifice to finally annihilate it. Others think Fulgrim himself burned it, weeping in a rare moment of lucidity. Whatever the case, the painting vanished from canon, just like the part of Fulgrim it might have held. There's a strange kind of tragedy here, because while most Chaos Primarchs lose themselves in their respective madness, Fulgrim's story always circles back to this haunting idea that there's someone else still inside, that his soul, or a piece of it, never left that room where the portrait was finished, and that everything since then has been the dance of a marionette, beautiful and broken, spinning in a storm of its own making. You can still find old fan art trying to reconstruct what the painting looked like. Some say it showed Fulgrim in golden armor, with eyes full of sadness rather than pride. Others depict him not in battle stance, but in repose, as if mourning something no one else could see. I've always found those images deeply moving, because they suggest something we don't talk about enough when it comes to chaos corruption. Not just the fall, but the loss. Not just what a Primarch becomes, but what he leaves behind. In Fulgrim's case, it might have been the most vital part of him. His soul, painted, trapped, and forgotten. When we talk about Fulgrim's possession, most people picture the standard chaos template. A daemon finds a host, claws its way in, and takes control. But with Fulgrim, it was never that clean. Never that simple. The story we're given in the lore offers just enough ambiguity to stir up decades of debate among fans, because what happened to him doesn't feel like a moment of weakness. It feels like a moment of surrender. Or maybe something even darker, an acceptance. And that's what makes it all the more disturbing. The turning point, as most agree, was during the campaign on Laren. That's where the daemon first touched him. It wasn't some grand explosion of warp energy or a dramatic ritual. No, it started with whispers, ideas, sensations. It started with a sword, an elegant Xenos blade, beautiful and alien, humming with the quiet pull of the immaterium. When Fulgrim took it, it felt like nothing else he had ever wielded. It responded to him. It resonated with the part of him that needed to believe he was special, different, destined for more than just war. And through that blade, the entity began to seep into him. Slowly, subtly, not by overpowering him, but by becoming part of his thoughts, his emotions. That's what makes this story so uncomfortable, because this wasn't possession in the classic sense, it was seduction. The daemon didn't break down the door to Fulgrim's soul, it knocked politely, it listened, it learned. And when the time was right, it offered a deal that Fulgrim was already halfway to accepting. There are moments in the lore where Fulgrim himself seems confused about what really happened. Times when he speaks in his old voice, then shifts, almost like something inside is mocking him. Or maybe he's mocking himself. Some fans think there was a genuine internal struggle, that the daemon fought him for control and won, that it was a battle of wills, brutal and exhausting. But others think differently. They believe that Fulgrim allowed it to happen, not because he wanted to fall, but because he was tired of fighting. It's hard to overstate how much pressure Fulgrim was under at the time. He was trying to live up to impossible standards, constantly compared to his brothers, and beginning to see the cracks in the Imperium's dream. Chaos didn't just offer him power, it offered relief. That's what I think really broke him. The idea that he didn't have to chase perfection anymore, that he could become perfection instantly, effortlessly, by letting go. But here's the twist that keeps fans up at night. There are hints that Fulgrim regretted it. That as the daemon began to overtake his mind, he realized what he had done, and it was too late. There's a chilling moment in some accounts where Fulgrim, in a rare moment of clarity, tries to warn Ferrus Manus of what's happening, tries to resist. But the daemon is too strong by then, or maybe Fulgrim's will was too fractured. Maybe he didn't want to fight anymore. And then there's the way the daemon talks as Fulgrim. Not just using his voice, but his memories, his mannerisms, his words. It's so convincing that even his sons couldn't tell the difference at first. That blurring of identity is what really unsettles me, because it suggests that the demon didn't just take over Fulgrim, it became him. Or maybe worse, it awakened something that was always there. That's one of the more terrifying fan theories, that Fulgrim wasn't possessed in the traditional sense. He merged, that there's no clean line between man and demon anymore. Just one being, born of ambition and despair, dancing in a mirror made of flesh. Still, some hold on to the idea that the real Fulgrim is still inside, that he watches everything, a ghost in his own body. There's a theory I really love, heartbreaking as it is, that the daemon allowed a sliver of Fulgrim's consciousness to remain, just to torment him. That every atrocity, every scream, every moment of twisted pleasure is seen and felt by the man who once sought beauty in all things. Trapped, powerless, endlessly aware. And maybe that's why Fulgrim's fall feels so different from the others. Because it wasn't about rage or ideology or some grand betrayal. It was a quiet collapse, a man who looked into the abyss and saw a reflection he couldn't look away from. Not because it scared him, but because it understood him. There's also an angle that gets discussed a lot in fan circles, that the daemon was, in a way, Fulgrim's own creation. A psychic construct born from his suppressed desires and failures. Not an external entity, but a shadow self made real by the warp's influence. If that's true, then the entire concept of possession changes. It means Fulgrim wasn't taken, he became. And that's far more frightening than any demon invasion. The tragedy of Fulgrim is layered. He wasn't consumed in a blaze of madness. He dissolved, like silk in acid, one part at a time. And when the transformation was complete, there was no dramatic scream, no final cry for help, just silence. And in that silence, the daemon smiled, because it hadn't stolen a soul, it had been invited in. And that, more than anything, is what makes Fulgrim's possession a nightmare you can't wake up from. Fulgrim's fall to Slaanesh wasn't a leap, it was a slow, spiraling descent. And that's what makes it feel so real, so intimate, and honestly, so heartbreaking. It wasn't a moment of betrayal or some climactic explosion of madness. It was a series of tiny compromises, each one dressed in beauty, each one whispered in his ear with words that sounded like poetry. And by the time he realized he'd strayed too far, the road behind him was gone. Only the descent remained. For many fans, the question is what truly broke him? Was it power, pleasure, or something far more human, guilt? After all, Fulgrim wasn't a mindless beast. He was a thinker, a lover of art, someone who once stood for refinement in a galaxy of blood and mud. And when you take someone like that and drag them through the horror of Istvan, something's bound to crack. Istvan Vive is the moment that gets talked about most. That's when Fulgrim struck down Fabius Bile, his brother, his equal, maybe even his closest friend. The betrayal wasn't just strategic, it was personal. And the act itself, brutal. Final. Fans often debate how much control Fulgrim had in that moment. Some say it was all the daemon's doing, that he was just a puppet by then. But others think Fulgrim was fully present, that he knew what he was doing and did it anyway. Because somewhere inside, he believed the Emperor had abandoned them all, and Fabius was too stubborn to see it. But guilt has a funny way of shaping a soul. After Fabius fell, Fulgrim didn't gloat. He didn't revel in it the way Angron would. He recoiled. There are accounts, whether canonical or expanded from older sources, where Fulgrim collapses afterward, staring at what he's done, and breaks. Not with rage, with grief. He tries to end his own life, takes up a blade, presses it to his own throat, but the demon laughs. It mocks him, stops him, holds his hand still, and in that moment, you get the sense that Fulgrim realizes it's too late, that the voice inside his head is no longer just a whisper, it's part of him now. That's where the conversation around Slaanesh really starts to change. Because Fulgrim didn't just serve Slaanesh, he became entwined with the Prince of Pleasure in a way that feels different from how, say, Mortarion belongs to Nurgle. It wasn't worship, it was resonance. Fulgrim didn't fall to Slaanesh because he was weak. He fell because, deep down, the philosophies of excess, of self-indulgence, of perfection through pleasure and pain, they spoke to him. Not all at once, but piece by piece. There's this fan theory I've always liked. That Fulgrim's initial resistance to chaos wasn't about moral clarity, but about aesthetic rejection. That he found the early forms of chaos too crude, too brutish, too lacking in elegance. But when Slaanesh came shimmering like a star made of silk and song, Fulgrim didn't see a god. He saw a mirror. He saw a reflection of what he wanted the universe to be: beautiful, decadent, transcendent. And maybe he realized it didn't matter anymore who made the rules. He just wanted the freedom to make his own. That's what makes Fulgrim's alignment with Slaanesh so fascinating. It doesn't feel like a conquest. It feels like a seduction that became a refuge. Fans often argue whether Fulgrim truly believed in the chaos cause, or whether he simply gave up trying to fight the weight of guilt and expectation. I lean toward the second. I think, after Ferris, something inside him broke for good. He stopped chasing perfection through control and began chasing it through surrender. The Emperor's children followed him willingly, of course. They were already teetering on the edge, already steeped in ritual and discipline twisted into obsession. And when Fulgrim changed, they didn't see a tragedy. They saw a revelation. Their father wasn't weakened, he was ascended. And that's how the corruption spread like wildfire. Not by force, but by awe. One of the saddest things in all of Fulgrim's story to me is that he still tries to make it beautiful. Even now, even as a demon prince, he sculpts his war zones into artwork, turns his murders into choreography. Because he hasn't let go of that original vision, he's just let it rot into parody. And that's where Slaanesh thrives. Not in new desires, but in the mutation of old ones. The perfection Fulgrim once sought is still there. It's just distorted, stretched beyond all recognition. But the shape remains. Some fans believe Fulgrim never truly embraced Slaanesh, that everything he does is performative, desperate, hollow. That deep down he knows this isn't what he wanted. But I don't know if that's true. I think in the end, Fulgrim chose this. Not because he wanted to serve a dark god, but because he couldn't bear the weight of being wrong. Because if this path is a lie, then he murdered his brother for nothing. And that's a truth he refuses to face. So instead, he leans in. He becomes the monster, the icon, the sculpted nightmare. And Slaanesh, in return, offers him what he always craved: endless admiration, unquestioned adoration, and the illusion of perfection. It's not real. It's a mask. But Fulgrim wears it like it was carved just for him, because at this point, it probably was. There's a lingering question that haunts every conversation about Fulgrim, one that never really gets resolved in the lore, but is whispered constantly in fan circles, theory threads, and late-night arguments among those of us who can't let go of this character. Is the Daemon Prince that now bears the name of Fulgrim truly him? Or is the real Fulgrim still somewhere inside, buried beneath the layers of warp-wrought perfection and pleasure? It's a chilling idea that the man and the monster are not the same, but trapped in the same body. We've seen hints, moments where the elegant mask slips, times when the creature that calls itself Fulgrim speaks with a voice that's not quite right, where cruelty becomes hesitation, where certainty flickers. These are rare, fleeting, and always ambiguous. But if you're paying attention, they start to look like more than just narrative flavor. They feel like cries from beneath the surface, like the ghost of a man trying to wake up inside his own nightmare. One of the most cited examples is from a story where Fulgrim visits a conquered world and stops to admire a ruined statue, something he once would have considered a masterpiece. The others around him laugh, mock it, talk about reshaping it in Slaanesh's image. But Fulgrim doesn't answer. He just stares. And for a moment, there's silence. Uncharacteristic silence. It's such a small detail, but it stands out. Because for someone who now embodies excess and noise, silence can be deafening. Some fans interpret this moment as a flare of memory, perhaps regret, perhaps something deeper. That's where the theory of duality comes in, that what we see now is not the full Fulgrim, but a twisted half, that the daemon who inhabits the body is not Fulgrim himself, but a warped overlay, something that merged with him but didn't fully consume him. That deep inside, the original Primarch is still present, sleeping, watching, maybe even screaming. There's even a fascinating idea that Fulgrim, in his daemonhood, still dreams, not of conquest or indulgence, but of the past, of Chemos, of his brothers, of the Emperor's praise, once so distant but always longed for. That in moments of rest, when the daemon form no longer needs to perform, the Primarch beneath remembers what he was, and worse, what he could have been. It's a beautiful and terrible thought, that the punishment for his fall isn't just damnation, but awareness of what was lost. Some fans go further. They suggest that Fulgrim has conversations with himself, that there are moments when the demon speaks and then a second voice replies, not out loud, but in the mind. That there is a split, a true schism, between the being of desire and the man of principle. They aren't fighting for control anymore, not like before, but they're present, both of them, coexisting, loathing each other, trapped in the same gilded cage. And if that's true, then Fulgrim's current state is less a victory for chaos and more a prolonged torment. Because Slaanesh isn't merciful. It doesn't erase what you were, it forces you to remember, constantly, as you defile every ideal you once stood for. The daemon doesn't silence the Primarch, it forces him to watch. That's the essence of excess, after all. Not just pleasure, but overwhelming sensation. Even regret becomes a kind of ecstasy, a flavor to savor. There are apocryphal stories, unofficial, maybe even fan-written, that describe Fulgrim seeing apparitions of Ferrus Manus in his reflection, not as a hallucination, as a memory surfacing, not to haunt him, but to remind him. And the way it's described, it's not just fear or guilt, it's longing, as if some part of Fulgrim wishes he could go back, not to undo the heresy, but to feel something real again. Because what he is now might be powerful, might be immortal, but it's not true. And somewhere, he knows it. And this idea, this persistent duality, isn't just about lore, it's about identity. Fulgrim was obsessed with the idea of wholeness, of becoming the perfect version of himself. But what if daemonhood fractured him instead? What if, in chasing unity, he ended up in pieces? The proud leader, the mourning brother, the possessed soul, the artist, the tyrant, the whisper in the void. All of them jostling beneath a face too beautiful to ever show the cracks. You even see it reflected in how the Emperor's children operate. They don't worship Fulgrim the way other legions revere their Primarchs. They imitate him. They become echoes of his broken reflection. Their entire culture is about mirroring what he became, not honoring what he was. And that says a lot, because it means they've forgotten, or chosen to forget, the man beneath the mask. Maybe that's safer for them. Maybe if they remembered who Fulgrim used to be, they'd see their own shame reflected back at them. I keep thinking, what if one day the daemon lets its guard down, just for a moment? What would happen if the true Fulgrim came forward? Would he lash out in fury? Would he try to atone? Or would he weep, hollow and broken, unable to recognize himself? That's the question that keeps me up. Because Fulgrim's tragedy isn't that he became a monster. It's that the man he once was might still be alive, somewhere deep inside, and no one is coming to save him. Every once in a while, the demon prince that wears Fulgrim's face says or does something that doesn't quite match the image he projects. These aren't grand gestures or plot-shifting revelations. Just flickers, subtle, almost imperceptible. A pause before a strike, a glance held too long, a word that doesn't belong in the language of excess. And for fans who still see the shadow of the old Fulgrim behind those shimmering violet eyes, those moments are everything. There's a moment described in an old campaign log, half lost in obscure Black Library source material, where Fulgrim walks alone after a particularly gruesome victory. His followers celebrate, turning the battlefield into a twisted opera of blood and ecstasy. But Fulgrim, he doesn't join them. He stands over a shattered mirror, gazing into it, silent, not admiring himself, not sculpting a new form from flesh, just staring, as if searching for something. And when one of his champions dares approach, he's met with a look, not of rage, not of pleasure, but something that can only be called absence, that quiet, hollow void where a scream used to be. Moments like that are rare. But they're not isolated. Fans have noticed a pattern over the years. Fulgrim, for all his theatrical cruelty and warped beauty, sometimes seems distracted, unfocused, and not in the way a creature of chaos might be when entranced by its own madness, but like someone trying to remember something they shouldn't, something painful, something real. Some theorists call this the reflection effect, a term coined in forums to describe these brief flashes of humanity, regret, or introspection in Fulgrim's otherwise perfectly corrupted demeanor. They argue that these moments are the proof that the original soul isn't gone. It's there, just submerged, drowned beneath layers of demonic artifice, warped by millennia of indulgence and pain, but still present. And in these flashes it tries to surface. Not to take back control, but just to feel. Just to exist. There's even a fan-written piece, non-canonical of course, where Fulgrim, in the aftermath of a massacre, finds a piece of an old Terran statue among the ruins. A marble hand reaching upward. He picks it up, holds it gently, and whispers the name of his homeworld. Not Chimos. Terra. The place he never knew but always longed to be part of. And the way it's written, you can almost believe it happened. Because it feels true to the version of Fulgrim who never wanted this. Who wanted to be loved, admired, remembered, not feared. This idea that Fulgrim might want to be freed from his own form is deeply compelling to a lot of fans. It suggests that he knows what he is and hates it. That behind the endless excess, the curated torment, the sculpted horror, there's a prisoner clawing at the walls. But if that's the case, why hasn't he broken free? Why hasn't the man within found a way to rise? Some say he can't, that the demon's grip is too strong, that every time he tries to rise, he's smothered by a tide of sensation too overwhelming to resist. Others believe he won't, that Fulgrim fears the man he used to be. That facing his past, his choices, his crimes, would destroy him in ways no blade ever could. Redemption, after all, isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's the worst curse imaginable, especially when you know you don't deserve it. There's also the darker theory, that these moments of clarity aren't Fulgrim at all, but the daemon mimicking him, replaying fragments of his soul like scenes from a play, performed for its own amusement, a kind of theater of the damned. That would be the cruelest twist, that we only think we're seeing the old Fulgrim, when really, we're watching a puppet show built from memory and mockery. But I choose to believe that the real Fulgrim is in there. Not whole, not strong, but real. Maybe he only awakens in dreams, maybe only in certain moments, when the music dies, when the battlefield grows cold, when there's no one watching. Maybe then, for just a heartbeat, the demon loses its grip. And what we see isn't madness or malice, but mourning. Because if Fulgrim truly feels trapped, if he truly regrets the path he took, then every one of these small reflections is a tragedy. A glimpse into a soul that was meant to shine, now flickering in the shadows of its own making. A masterpiece defaced but not destroyed. And that's what keeps the theory alive, that inside all the silk and gold, the serpentine elegance and unbearable cruelty, there is still a man, a brother, a Primarch, waiting, not for salvation, but for release. Not to be forgiven, but to be seen, just once more, as he truly was, before the mirror cracked, before the canvas bled, before the voice inside became the only one that ever answered back. The Emperor's children were once the embodiment of discipline, elegance, and excellence. Every motion they made, every word they spoke, was deliberate, crafted to reflect the perfection they believed they were born to achieve. They weren't just soldiers, they were artists of war. And at the center of that art stood Fulgrim, their father, their muse, their obsession. But what do you do when your inspiration becomes a curse? What happens to a legion when the very soul it reflects is cracked and screaming behind a gilded smile? It's not just that the Emperor's children fell, it's the way they fell that mirrors Fulgrim's torment so disturbingly. Other traitor legions collapsed in fury, in despair, in rebellion. But the Emperor's children, they dissolved. Their structure eroded, their bonds fractured, their sanity turned inside out, and all of it with smiles on their faces. They didn't break, they transformed. Just like he did. You can trace the spiral down through their rituals. The once strict drills turned into performative blood ballets. The ceremonies of refinement and honor became grotesque displays of excess and cruelty. They started chasing sensation the way they used to chase mastery. It was no longer about being the best. It was about feeling the most. Pain, pleasure, sound, touch. They began living in a state of constant overstimulation, like addicts strung out on a drug made of memory and regret. Some fans argue that this wasn't just the natural course of chaos corruption. They say this is Fulgrim's curse echoing through his sons, that his inner torment, the unresolved schism between the daemon and the man, somehow infected the Legion like a psychic plague. That what we're seeing in the Emperor's children is a Legion-wide projection of their Primarch's internal collapse. Not just emulation. Contagion. There's an idea I've come across more than once in fan interpretations, that each Emperor's child is, in a way, a mirror shard. Not of the perfect Fulgrim they once worshipped, but of the shattered one that emerged afterward. Each one carries a fragment of his madness, his sorrow, his hunger. They're not just followers of Slaanesh, they're the cracked pieces of Fulgrim's own broken reflection, scattered across the galaxy and screaming into the void. And you can feel it in how they act. Noise Marines, for instance, they don't just fight. They don't even just kill. They turn battle into spectacle, war into opera. Their weapons produce sounds that make flesh burst and brains liquefy, and they delight in it, not just because it's pleasurable, but because it's the only thing loud enough to drown out the silence of their own emptiness. It's almost like they're trying to fill a void that was never theirs to begin with. That void, I think, is Fulgrim's, and they've inherited it, not by blood, but by faith, by obsession. They wanted so badly to reflect his vision, his excellence, his beauty, that when he became a monster, they followed without hesitation. Even now, long after their cohesion as a legion has all but dissolved, they still mimic him. Their armor is still ornate, their speech still flowery, their movements still precise, but all of it is perverted, a performance. Like actors who no longer remember the original script, only the twisted version they've repeated for centuries. What really haunts me is the idea that some of them know, that beneath the madness and the noise there are Emperor's children who remember what they were supposed to be, who remember marching in perfect formation, remember the pride of Fulgrim's praise, remember believing in something more than sensation. And now they can't go back. They're trapped, just like he is. But instead of resisting it, they dive deeper, hoping that somewhere in the bottom of the abyss, they'll find meaning again. And maybe that's what makes their degeneration feel like a shared tragedy. It's not just that they're lost. It's that they were once so close to being something great. Fulgrim pushed them to reach higher, to embody beauty, to elevate humanity through action. And now they butcher worlds to the sound of their own screams, gilding corpses in gold leaf and calling it art. That's not just a fall, that's a mockery of everything they once stood for. There's a theory, admittedly more poetic than canonical, that Fulgrim's daemonhood created a ripple through the warp, one that permanently altered the souls of his sons. That their obsession, their hunger, their inability to stop feeling everything so violently isn't just chaos at work, it's the reflection of their father's own imprisonment. That every time Fulgrim mourns who he used to be, every time the man inside scratches at the glass walls of his mind, that pain radiates outward and infects them, not in words, in feeling, in impulse, in madness. And if that's true, then maybe they're not just victims of their own choices. Maybe they're the collateral damage of a god trapped inside a monster. Maybe their endless search for sensation is just another way of trying to feel him again, to understand him, to reach him. Or maybe, terrifyingly, they think that by becoming like him, they'll finally earn his love again. Even if there's nothing left of him to give it, they are his legacy, not his empire, not his achievements, not his perfection. Them, a legion of echoes, each one screaming into a void shaped like the man they used to believe in. And if Fulgrim truly is still alive inside watching, then that must be the worst punishment of all. Not just seeing what he became, but seeing what he made of his sons. If there's one character in the galaxy who might hold the key to Fulgrim's soul, it's Fabius Bile. And that's not just because he's the most brilliant, if horrifyingly unhinged geneticist the Emperor's children ever produced. It's because, for all his grotesque experiments and twisted creations, Bile is one of the few who still remembers who Fulgrim was, not just as a warlord or a demigod, but as a father. And more importantly, as a man. Fabius doesn't worship Fulgrim. He doesn't even fear him, not in the way the rest of the Legion does. What he feels is something far more complicated: disappointment. And underneath that, perhaps, grief. Because Fabius knew the Primarch when he was still something close to human. He saw the vision, the brilliance, the ambition, not just to conquer, but to perfect. And then he watched it all rot. Not in an instant, but slowly, beautifully, terribly. Like watching a statue you carved yourself begin to bleed. That's why Fabius started trying to recreate Fulgrim. Not just clone him, not just replicate the flesh, but somehow recapture the soul of the being that once inspired legions. He's tried it multiple times, each attempt more bizarre and unstable than the last. There was the vat-grown homunculus that couldn't stop screaming, the perfect clone that began to rot from the inside out after speaking Fulgrim's name, the hybrid echo that painted its own skin with war-torn poetry before tearing its face apart. And behind each of these failures is a single question that Bile never says out loud. What did we lose? Some fans believe Bile's experiments are less about ego and more about mourning, that with each attempt, he's not trying to bring back a leader, or even a god, but a memory. The Fulgrim who spoke of transforming humanity into something transcendent. The Fulgrim who taught that war could be beautiful. The Fulgrim who might have led the Imperium into a golden age if the galaxy had let him. That man is gone, and Bile can't let go. But what does it say about Fulgrim himself that one of his own sons, one of his most loyal sons, has spent centuries trying to replace him? It suggests something devastating, that even those closest to Fulgrim don't believe the creature who walks now is truly him. That the soul that once shone so brightly has either been extinguished or locked away so deeply that only science or madness might dig it back out. There's a passage in one of the older texts where Bile, speaking to a dying clone, whispers that the soul is the final gene. It's not canonical, but it's the kind of line that sticks with you. Because it means he's not just looking for DNA. He's looking for presence, for essence, for the echo of Fulgrim's voice not as a daemon prince, but as the flawed, brilliant, passionate being who once walked among mortals and tried to teach them to be gods. Some fans believe Bile succeeded once. That in one of his early attempts, he created a version of Fulgrim, briefly, that spoke with clarity and sorrow. A being that knew it was incomplete, but still tried to reach out. There are whispers of this clone confronting the real Fulgrim, pleading with him, asking him to return to himself. The story goes that Fulgrim laughed and then destroyed the clone with a single gesture. But for a second he hesitated, just long enough for the clone to smile, as if that moment had been worth everything. And maybe that's why Bile keeps going. Because he saw that hesitation, because he believes, knows, that something of the old Fulgrim still lingers. And if it lingers, it can be reached. Not through faith, not through war, but through flesh, through science, through art, through the very tools Fulgrim once claimed would elevate mankind. Of course, this says as much about Fabius Bile as it does about Fulgrim, because Bile is, in his own twisted way, just as haunted, just as broken. He claims to despise gods, to reject chaos, to walk his own path, but he can't stop reaching back to that one moment in his past when something truly beautiful stood above him and said, "You are mine." He's not trying to recreate Fulgrim because he believes in him. He's trying because he needs to believe that Fulgrim wasn't just another lie. And maybe on some level, Fulgrim knows it. Maybe that's why he tolerates Bile's existence, why he hasn't annihilated him like so many others, because he understands. Because deep down, the demon prince of Slaanesh still wants to be remembered, still wants to be mourned. And Bile, for all his heresies and horrors, is the only one still trying. There's a horrible beauty to all of it. The sculptor trying to reshape his broken idol, the monster letting him try, and between them, the ghost of a god who once believed in perfection and became its prisoner. Whether any part of Fulgrim's true self remains is impossible to say. But the fact that Fabius Bile keeps trying to find it might be the saddest, most human thing in all of Warhammer. Because in the end, it's not just Fulgrim's soul he's trying to resurrect. It's the hope that souls like his can still be saved. Fulgrim's return in the current lore hit like a velvet-wrapped hammer. For years, he was more of a legend than an active player, an echo of the past, a cautionary tale whispered through the warp. But when he re-emerged on the battlefield, he wasn't hiding anymore. There was no subtlety, no ambiguity. He came back in full splendor, a towering, serpentine horror cloaked in impossible beauty and unspeakable violence. The kind of presence that makes you forget to breathe and then wonder if you even want to anymore. The question is, what does this new Fulgrim tell us about what's really going on inside him? Because at first glance, it seems like the demon has won completely. Fulgrim doesn't speak like he used to. His words are decadent, cryptic, soaked in pleasure and menace. His movements are choreographed, theatrical, more like a dancer than a warrior. He doesn't just fight, he performs. And when you look at him, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the man he once was is completely gone, dissolved into the perfect form he always chased. But if you look closer, if you really pay attention, there are still these tiny, unsettling inconsistencies. Moments where his grandeur slips, just for a heartbeat. One of the most discussed examples is when Fulgrim confronted a group of loyalist Astartes, and instead of mocking them outright or unleashing a wave of sonic horror, he paused. He looked at one of them, an Emperor's Children's successor chapter Marine, and simply watched him. Not with hunger, not with amusement, with curiosity, as if trying to place a memory that wouldn't quite surface. It's those moments that keep the debate alive. Because if Fulgrim were truly gone, if the daemon had fully consumed him, there wouldn't be hesitation. There wouldn't be these quiet, reflective beats in the middle of carnage. Fans have pointed out that even his speeches, though drenched in Slaaneshi excess, occasionally touch on strange themes: loss, memory, beauty remembered but out of reach. That doesn't sound like a daemon prince reveling in eternal pleasure. That sounds like something else. Something fractured. There's one scene in particular from a recent campaign arc that absolutely broke me. Fulgrim walks through a destroyed city, not triumphant, not amused, just silent. He trails his claws across the broken stone of a cathedral wall and whispers a name. We never find out what the name is. It's lost in the noise. But the look on his face, described in chilling detail, is not one of victory. It's closer to longing. And the artist's render of that moment, his serpent body coiled among ash and ruin, his eyes half-lidded, his expression strangely soft, it's not what you'd expect from a being of pure corruption. It looks almost human. And that brings us back to the core of the theory. Is this Fulgrim the final form? The full daemon, fully Slaaneshi, fully lost? Or is this a mask worn so tightly that no one can see the pain behind it? A lot of fans are split. Some believe that Fulgrim is now more concept than character, a living embodiment of excess and elegance, too far gone for anything human to remain. But others argue that the very theatricality of his presence is a defense mechanism, that all the silk, the art, the bloodless perfection, it's armor, not against his enemies, but against the truth that something inside him still remembers, and can't bear what he's become. That theory only gains weight when you look at how he treats his own sons. Fulgrim doesn't lead the Emperor's children in any traditional sense. He appears when it suits him, disappears without warning, leaves them to their madness. It's not command, it's detachment. And it makes you wonder, does he avoid them because he doesn't care? Or because they remind him of what he's lost, of what he did to them? Some believe that Fulgrim's reappearance is the final confirmation that he has embraced his fate completely, that the man is gone and only the monster remains. But I don't think that's the whole story, because Warhammer, for all its brutality and despair, has always left room for tragedy. And Fulgrim is one of the most tragic figures in the entire setting. His current form is not just a symbol of Slaaneshi dominance, it's a monument to regret. A shrine to the idea that perfection, once pursued without mercy, becomes a prison you can't escape. And that's why his return matters so much. Because it gives us a chance to see him again, to study him, to wonder if there's something, anything, left inside that twisted, beautiful horror that still remembers Chimos, that still dreams in the quiet of warp space, that still whispers names no daemon should know. Fulgrim doesn't scream for vengeance. He doesn't call for loyalty. He sings, he dances, he leaves behind trails of roses made of flesh and monuments carved from screams. And through it all, maybe, just maybe, he's still looking for something. Not power, not adoration, but release. That's what keeps this story alive. Not just because of what he's doing, but because of what might still be possible. That beneath all the horror, all the seduction, all the gilded sin, there's still a soul trying to claw its way out. Or maybe not even trying anymore. Maybe just watching, waiting, wondering if it will ever be seen again. There's something cruelly poetic about Fulgrim's damnation. How the very perfection he chased became the bars of his own cage. He was always obsessed with form, with elegance, with beauty, elevated beyond mortal understanding. And now, as a daemon prince of Slaanesh, he has achieved it. He is flawless, his body is a work of art sculpted by the warp itself, and yet it feels hollow. Because perfection, when frozen and unchanging, isn't enlightenment, it's entrapment. This is where the symbolism really begins to dig into you. Fulgrim's transformation isn't just physical, it's metaphysical. He's no longer allowed to evolve. He no longer fails, no longer doubts, no longer struggles in the way humans do. And that might sound like transcendence, but in reality, it's stagnation. He's locked in a state of eternal aesthetic bliss, where every gesture is deliberate and every expression rehearsed. It's not life, it's performance. And behind the curtain, there's no audience, just silence. A lot of fans see this as the ultimate irony. Fulgrim sought to become a being of pure excellence, to strip away the crude and the base and replace it with something sublime. But in doing so, he lost the very thing that made him feel. The beauty he craved was always tied to struggle, to the imperfections he worked to overcome, to the flaws he tried to refine. Without that tension, without that imperfection, perfection means nothing. It becomes static, cold, sterile. So what if Fulgrim's current form isn't just a curse? What if it's a lesson? A reflection not just of his personal failure, but of what happens when the pursuit of aesthetic or spiritual perfection becomes an obsession. His daemon body is breathtaking, wreathed in living jewels, draped in shimmering flesh, carved into impossible proportions. But it's all too much. There's a sickly sweetness to it, like something that's been overpolished to the point it loses all character. It no longer moves you, it numbs you. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the tragedy is that Fulgrim got exactly what he wanted, and it destroyed him. Because the real world isn't made for perfection. It's made for growth, for trial and error, for things that hurt and change us. Fulgrim rejected that. He wanted to rise above it, and now he's suspended in a form that cannot evolve, cannot question, cannot even remember what it was like to doubt himself without vomiting roses and warp fire. There's an allegorical layer to this that really hits home for a lot of fans. We all chase our own forms of perfection. Success, appearance, achievement, and sometimes we wrap ourselves in ideals so tightly we forget how to breathe. Fulgrim's story is a warped mirror of that very human condition. He turned his dream into a prison. And now, he can't tell where the dream ends and the bars begin. Some fans take it even further, suggesting that the warp intentionally sculpted him this way to punish him. Not through pain, but through completion. The warp is full of irony like that. Nurgle grants life through rot, Tzeentch weaves change into loops, and Slaanesh offers perfection, knowing that once you have it, there's nowhere left to go, no higher mountain. Just the echo of your own beauty, endlessly repeating until it means nothing. And here's where things get dark. What if Fulgrim knows this? What if that's the real prison? Not the body, not the demonhood, but the awareness that he's reached the summit and there's nothing left. That every glorious battle is just another rerun, every new disciple just another pale imitation of the past. That his own form, his own voice, his own legend are now the walls that keep him from touching anything real again. It starts to feel like a living tomb, a sarcophagus made of perfection. And if the man inside still exists, even as the faintest whisper, he must feel it every second, the weight of the form he once begged the universe to give him. That's what makes this kind of symbolic reading so brutal, because it doesn't offer hope. It doesn't suggest that he can be rescued or redeemed or changed. It just asks the question, what if you got what you wanted, and that was the worst thing that ever happened to you? Even the way Fulgrim moves in battle is part of this metaphor. He doesn't lunge or strike with rage. He glides, he dances. He turns slaughter into ceremony. It's beautiful and it's soulless. There's no real connection to his victims. No sense of righteous fury or even joy. Just aesthetic domination. Like a sculpture crushing its admirer under its own weight. And it's worth asking, what does this mean for his legacy? For his place in the galaxy? Fulgrim isn't feared like Angron. He isn't revered like Magnus. He's envied, yes, but also pitied. His sons are mad, his creations are shallow, and his own presence, while powerful, never quite feels alive. It's like he's performing a role he no longer believes in, but can't stop playing. I think that's why his story cuts deeper than many of the others. Because it's not just about chaos. It's not just about betrayal or damnation. It's about the slow death of meaning, the erosion of authenticity beneath the weight of image. Fulgrim didn't just lose himself to a daemon, he lost himself to the idea of himself. And now he's trapped inside that idea forever. Perfect, beautiful, and utterly alone. So here we are, staring into the heart of something that was never meant to be simple. Fulgrim's story is not a clean arc, not a rise and fall in the traditional sense. It's a spiral, one that starts with dreams of beauty and ends in something so grotesquely divine that you can't even tell where the line between horror and awe begins. And maybe that's the whole point, that Fulgrim isn't a warning or a villain or even a victim. He's a reflection of us, of the things we chase and the things that break us. There's a reason people keep coming back to him. Not just because he's visually striking or lore-rich, but because he feels real, in that deeply uncomfortable way. You can see the path he walked, step by step, and wonder, if I had his power, his vision, his pressure, would I have done differently? Would anyone? The clues scattered throughout his story are like whispers from the warp itself. The painting that might hold a piece of his soul, the possession that wasn't quite complete, the moments of silence in the middle of the chaos, the dreams that don't belong in a daemon's mind, the way his sons echo his torment without even realizing it, the sculptor turned mad scientist who still tries to bring him back, and finally that twisted perfection, too exquisite to be real, too hollow to be alive. There's something so chilling about the idea that Fulgrim might still be in there, trapped behind his own eyes, watching the world burn in his name. Or maybe he's not. Maybe we're just projecting that hope onto a being who no longer deserves it. Maybe we need to believe that a part of him is still fighting because the alternative, that he's happy like this, is just too terrible to accept. But what if that's the most Fulgrim thing of all? The duality, the contradiction, the performance and the pain, the perfect surface with a soul clawing at the walls underneath. He's not just a demon prince. He's a walking contradiction. He always was, and maybe he always will be. I think that's what draws me to him, not the power, not the excess, but the tragedy. The way every step forward was also a step away from who he truly was. The way his greatest strength, his pursuit of perfection, was also the flaw that doomed him. And now, in this final form, he is both everything he wanted to be and nothing like what he was. And if there's still a voice inside him, a whisper of the Primarch, of the artist, of the brother who once wept for killing Ferris, then I don't think it's crying for forgiveness. I think it just wants to be seen, to be remembered, to not be completely swallowed by the thing it became. So what do you think? Is the painted soul of Fulgrim still trapped inside himself? Is this the final form of a fallen god, or just another mask worn too long? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. There's so much we still don't know, and maybe, just maybe, in talking about it, we get a little closer to the truth. Or at the very least, we keep the memory of the man he once was alive. If you enjoyed diving this deep into Fulgrim's labyrinth, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another journey into the twisted beauty of the Warhammer universe. And as always, stay curious, stay heretical, and stay human.